Welcome back to the Female Dating Strategy, the meanest female only podcast on the internet. I'm your host, Diana.
And I'm Rose, and today I have the pleasure and the honor of introducing Dr. Gail Dines. Gail, welcome.
I'm so happy to be back.
We're so excited to have you here.
We are huge devotees of Dr. Gail Dines here at FDS. And if you haven't listened to previous episodes where she appeared with Savannah and Ro, please go back into our back catalog and listen to those. But Diana and I also wanted the opportunity because, as she was saying in the pre-talk, every day it's like another moon landing. It's just craziness after craziness. And so we wanted to host Gail and sort of discuss what's going on in the current zeitgeist. If I may introduce Gail briefly, she is the founder, president, and CEO of Culture Reframed, which is the first organization to recognize and address hypersexualized media, aka media in general, and pornography as the public health crisis of the digital age. She has also written a book called Pornland: How Porn Has Hijacked Our Society. She is Professor Emerita of Sociology and Women's Studies at Wheelock College in Boston. Gail, what an honor. Thank you so much for appearing here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, believe me.
It's been your third time now. We're so honored. We love that you show up here because every single time we're just in awe of your wisdom.
And I love the way that the whole thing works. And I love that the way you come at this issue, which is so critical, in our life. I mean, in young women's lives, older women's lives, you just really touch on the very issues that women and girls are dealing with.
Thank you, Gail. That's really nice to hear.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you so much. It's so nice to see. I mean, it's sad to see as well how you've held the fort for so many years, but your message has just been so reaffirming for so many women who are in this digital landscape, who are dating out there, who are wondering why the men that they're dating are disaffected. Why are they addicted to pornography? I'm sure every woman who's been out dating at all can relate to what you put out because it's been an issue for such a long time, but it seems like in many ways it's just gotten worse. And, we want to talk a little bit about the show today, the show Adolescence, because I think that it's a show that actually did talk about how the portrayals of masculinity. We had a discussion a couple of weeks ago where you talked about the concept of whether healthy masculinity is even it's misgiving, because at the end of the day, it's not healthy masculinity, it's just masculinity. So I wanted to talk a little bit with you about, what were your impressions about the show Adolescence, and what do you feel like it got right and what did you feel like it didn't, do that well?
First of all, it was heart-wrenching. I mean, it was very difficult to watch in the sense that you saw this kid get pulled into the manosphere, which we find all the time at Culture Reframed when we're doing lectures and workshops, is that there is no adult to guide him. I mean, what was very clear from and I think they got this right, was that, the teachers had no idea what was going on the internet, the mother and father, the police, none of them in that kid's life really understood what was happening. So I think it really got that right. His anger, his rage, the way in which he was pulled into this ideology of the manosphere that blames women because he felt bad about himself. What I think they missed is that any boy of that age, with or without the manosphere, would have been watching pornography. We know that from studies. By 13, virtually all boys with access to the internet have seen porn. Now, if he was pulled into the manosphere, he would have seen a lot of porn. And I think the missing piece there was the role of pornography and the way in which it shapes what it means to be a man today, and especially for young boys, because, we've done such a horrible job of sex education, especially in the United States. And also, all over the world, it's not so great. There's some of the Scandinavian countries are good, but on the whole, it's been a very poor job. And especially what we found was that it doesn't address the lives of young people. Even the good stuff that's science-based does not talk about the fact that pornography and hypersexualized media are the wallpaper of kids' lives, especially boys with pornography. So the question becomes, how does it shape them? What does it mean during the adolescent period when your brain is firing and wiring and making new neurons, etc., that you are watching this stuff, masturbating to it, internalizing the messages? Because pornography is a story. It's a story about women and men. It's a story about what constitutes femininity and masculinity. It's also a story about how men should treat women. And it goes way beyond the issue of sex or violence, which, of course, you have to talk about with mainstream pornography today. So I think what we don't do enough is deconstruct the ideology of pornography and how it impacts both boys and girls. Because, when you really sort of lay waste to a generation of boys, which is what our culture is doing, you absolutely lay waste to a generation of girls, because girls are always the sort of, always have to deal with the dysfunction of boys. They become kind of collateral damage of this society. So I think that what they missed really was the role of pornography. And somebody, hopefully needs to get them to really understand, the writers, what is it like to be brought up with pornography?
Gail, I have two questions for you. Semi-related, one is directly related. Which one would you like to hear first?
Whichever one you prefer to ask.
Well, because of how wild the times are in the United States right now, and I think worldwide, you just had me think about the fact that, pornography has been sort of deeply embedded and widely accessible more than ever in the last 30 years. And I just have to wonder if a lot of these men who are now in positions of power came of age during this pornified age. And it just makes me wonder if that's also what we're dealing with here on the international stage.
Great question. What we're seeing is masculinity run amok. Okay, that's what we're seeing across, many countries. And I think a lot of them did not necessarily come of age because they're older. But I think that the pornified culture, which spreads beyond pornography, they are basically socialized into that. I mean, what's really interesting is the kid gloves are off with men, especially in this country, declared war on women, children, everyone. These are, when I read the newspaper and see what's going on, and the cutting in food stamps and the destruction of DEI and the anti-abortion and all of that, and the poverty and the distress it's causing, you just see a group of absolute male bullies from the playground who don't care about anybody, just want to look, bigger than the next man. And I cannot stand the way in which women and girls have become the casualty of this, and ultimately boys as well. Let's remember that. But I see them as they're like adolescent playground bullies. The only problem is they have a lot of power, and they have the power to make lives completely miserable for everyone around them. They make them miserable on multiple levels. But, always being someone who's interested in the way that class, gender, and race intersect, of course, that the more you are poor and of colour and female, the more likely you are to be the victim of this bully schoolyard culture. And I also see them, it was interesting, they were talking about cutting food stamps, and I thought, do any of you have any responsibility or think about children's lives? Is it just about you? And the answer seems to be yes. It's just about these men trying to increase the power and show who's the biggest bully on the block.
If this is how men are acting who were not brought up in this environment, what is it going to deteriorate to, or what can we even think to imagine about what the next generation will be doing as they come into power?
Actually, we can see now what the next generation, first of all, because one of the things we are seeing, which is actually one of the scariest things, is we're seeing that increasingly child rape of both boys and girls, but especially girls, is being committed by other children, mainly boys. So what we're seeing is a whole shift in, it used to be that if a boy was raping his sister or cousin or whoever, and by the way, and some studies show that the age of the boy rapist has gone down from 15 to 11, and that the age of the girl victim has gone down from about 8 or 9 to 4 years old.
Oh,
yeah, terrible. And when we work with frontline health experts who actually deal with these children, what they find is that the boys are doing porn acts on these girls. They're strangling them, anal penetration, and they're filming it as they go along. So where do they get this idea from to film it? So, pre-internet porn, you could assume that if a boy was acting out sexually against another child, that he himself had probably been sexually abused. Now, they cannot assume that. And we do work with a lot of child exploitation, anti-child exploitation organizations, especially the children's advocacy centers, of which there's 900 across the United States. And, say no longer can we assume that he has in fact seen pornography, that you have to develop questions that and very carefully ask these questions about their exposure to pornography, both for the victimizer and the victim. And, I hate calling a 12, 13-year-old boy a victimizer. I hate doing that because in a way, he's also become a victim of this culture. Not as much obviously as girls, but there's a very upsetting scene in adolescence where, he's claiming that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. And even though he's looking at the tape, and in a way, what he's saying is that's not who I am, that's who I've become. That's not me. He's not so much denying the act as saying it's not who I am in my essence. And you can see that, I do not believe for 1 minute that boys are born violent. You might have a very, very small percent, but the reality of the world is that they are turned into being violent by the culture. And I mean, this is why I always say feminists are men's best friends, right? We're the last group who believe in the humanity of men, because if we didn't, we wouldn't be doing this work. We would just all go and live in a cave somewhere or go to a desert island, because we believe that men can be as human, as kind, as empathic, and as compassionate as girls and women. We really believe that and that they're born. And I have to say, as the mother of a son, I know my sweet little boy and how we had to fight the culture to keep him, a really grounded human being with empathy and compassion. But the culture wanted something else out of him. So it was basically my husband and I having a tug of war against the culture. I'm happy to say we won.
Yay!
Oh, yeah. I mean, I've got wonderful stories to tell about what boys can be because we brought up our son where his first language was feminism. I mean, words like sexism and misogyny were dropping out of his mouth by the age of 4. Got a lovely story to tell that I go into the room and he used to like National Geographic and he must have been about 4 or 5 and he's pointing at the TV and he's shaking his head and I said, "What's the matter, honey? What are you upset with this?" And he said, "You know what, Mum? They keep saying man and his environment. Well, what about women and their environment?" I mean, that was at like 4 or 5. And he would see things before I would. It was so astounding to watch what it looks like when feminism is their first language. Another time we're walking, again, he's very young, we're walking past a group of shops and there's a small boutique. And he goes, "Uh-oh." I said, "What's the matter?" He said, "Look, they're hanging her." And true enough, it was Christmas time and they were hanging the mannequin by her neck with Christmas lights. And I said to him, "Well, what should we do?" He said, "Well, we have to go in and protest, of course." So in we go. What I wanted to do was go home and make dinner and get everything ready. But no, he said, "We've got to protest." So, of course, we protested. And I went in and I said, "This is a form of violence against women, even though it's not a woman, you're showing hanging." And they started arguing with me. I said, "Look, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm just telling you that if you don't take that down within 48 hours, you will go on a boycott list. And let me tell you that the last time that somebody went on a boycott list, they actually went bankrupt. So it's up to you." And I walked out. It was down within 24 hours. And let me tell you, there is no boycott list. She wanted to fight, the woman who owned and I wasn't going to fight, but you threaten that there's going to be bankruptcy or economic reprisals, and that's what they listen to. But it was so interesting. He saw it before me. He definitely did. So I want people to understand that our boys are so precious. Of course, our girls are completely precious as well. And as feminists, those are the group we protect the most. But, it's this notion that boys will be boys is the most man-hating thing I can think of. Feminists are not man-hating. We have faith. And as long as we have faith in boys and men's capacities to be good and kind and as equal to women, because when you say, men and women want to be equal to men, the response to that is don't aim so low.
Yeah, I mean, it's fair. The crazy thing is just recently we've heard the press secretary of the United States say boys will be boys when talking about like the men in the office sitting and arguing with each other. So it seems like we're being taken back to this horrible place where we're just justifying like men's inability to articulate their emotions properly. And like that's one of the things I was thinking about when I was watching Adolescence as well is why wasn't there any depiction of him watching pornography? It's almost like they sidestepped it, even though you seem to be saying that it's actually a huge part of their radicalization. I think a huge number of young men, they turn to figures like Andrew Tate and all these people because they're looking for role models and they don't find it. So I'm kind of curious to know, what do you feel is, men's responsibility in all of this? And do you feel like the situation has gotten better in terms of people actually acknowledging how much of a problem pornography is with young boys, especially?
The question I have is, most of the people in media, especially those who are getting things, published and filmed and disseminated and produced, they tend to be, these power brokers are men. Is one of the reasons why we don't see media grappling honestly with pornography, because like to a lot of these men, it's the sacred cow. They dare not touch what they hold so dear.
That's perfect answer. So you said exactly what I was going to say. Exactly. Is that they are porn users, a lot of them. They are attached to their porn. I mean, you can see when I watch a movie or a TV series, you can see immediately their porn use come out just by the way they talk. More the writers, you can see it's absolutely, they're drenched in pornography. And I think it's the third rail for most men. They won't accept that pornography is bad because they've been using it probably for the younger guys for most of their, adolescent and adult lives.
It's addictive behavior is what it screams to me.
Yeah.
Well, at the far end of the spectrum of effects is definitely addiction and it's growing, right? But it's not just all along the line, pornography, you cannot look at pornography and come away unchanged. Now, because pornography is really the visual representation of the ideology of the manosphere. Nowhere is the ideology of the manosphere delivered so crisply, so cleanly, and so succinct as in pornography. And it's delivered to men's brains via the penis, which is an extremely powerful delivery system. So if you want to talk about the manosphere and the ideology of it, as I say, pornography is the perfect representation of it. And then it's like a loop because that feeds them going back to the Andrew Tates of the world. Because in pornography, men make hate to women, not love. It's all about hate and rage and anger, and she's a slut and she's a whore and certain things I can't say on the radio or the podcast.
You can go right ahead.
Okay, well, one of the terms they call her is a cum dumpster, things like this. And of course, cunt all the time. She's a cunt. So I think in what's going on in our culture is that before boys have even laid claim to their own sexuality, the porn industry has come in and hijacked it, which is why the subtitle of my book is How Porn Has Hijacked Our Sexuality. And everyone's, but especially boys. And again, another story that I always like to tell about my son was, we did a lot of scaffolding and when he was about talking about issues and stuff, but when he was about 10 or 11, we talked about pornography. And I said to him, look, honey, I can't be with you all the time and you don't want me there all the time, obviously. And so, when you're out at some point, or were you with friends, or maybe you just stumble across pornography, I said, and I want you to think about something. I said, you have a choice to look. And so when you're making this choice, this is what you should ask yourself. Who are you sexually? And at this point, we don't know. Are you going to be gay, straight, bi? We really don't know. I said, but whatever you're going to be, it's going to reflect the beautiful human being that you are. And it's going to be yours and you're going to lay claim to it. I said, but if you look at pornography, they're going to steal it from you. These capitalists, and we used word like this in the house, these capitalists are going to steal it from you and you're not even going to own it. They're going to own it. And that's a terrible thing to give away before you've even owned it. And to say how it then translates is when he was in college, he was going with friends for a drink and he found out they were going to a strip club and he turned back and wouldn't go. And I asked him why, and I thought I was going to get the mother violence against women argument. But the answer was very interesting and really struck me. And he said, you know what, Mom, I only have this one body to live in. And I don't think I could have stood to live in this body if I would have been involved in exploiting a woman. And I just thought, that's it. It's his moral compass now. This is who he is. And he made that choice. And he thought about how he would feel. And I think that is critical for men and boys to begin to ask themselves, how do they feel? Because I know when I give lectures in colleges and what have you, and I just show a few images of pornography. And what's interesting is that these, college student males have never looked at pornography without an erection. Now, we know that when men get sexually aroused and get erections, they're not in any frontal lobe to start deconstructing the image they're masturbating to, okay? Their goal is to obviously get off as quickly as whatever as possible. So here they are in the very, unsexual setting of a college hall, listening, looking at the pornography that they have masturbated to over and over again, but without an erection. So it is the first time in their lives they have ever really looked at it. And they feel so many times what you see is they feel horror and disgust, self disgust. And that's not a good feeling, by the way, for anyone to have. But they get it. And I have to say, I get no pushback in colleges anymore from the guys because they understand this is not good for them. This is not who they want to be. Because I say that look in the mirror and ask yourself, do I want to be that boy or man who gets off on seeing violence against women? And in most cases, I'm happy to say they're not, even when they're using pornography, because the pornographers are fantastic manipulators. They know how to bring these boys and men in. They know how to grab them. They know how to send algorithms that pull them in from every social media site. So it's really interesting, the response that I get when I go out. Because you think, because I can see as I walk in and start the lecture, I can see the young male students kind of hostility coming off them, thinking, what the fuck does this middle-aged woman know about pornography? And yet, within 10 minutes, if they could reach out and touch me, they would. I see their whole bodies begin to relax, unfold. I watch their faces. You feel the change in the room. Because, they think I'm going to come in and shout at them as a feminist and tell them, they're disgusting and etc. And when they hear that I have empathy for what is happening to them from the industry and that I get how they feel. And then, of course, the women there, I mean, the light bulbs go off in their head. And often, because so many of them have been raped and pornography has been implicated, and they've never seen that before. So, I mean, it's kind of an extremely emotional, moving reality when after I've spoken, I've got men on one side lining up and women on the other. And because they're beginning to see the world like they or understand it in a way they've never understood it before. And they are hungry for it. And I mean, often I can't get off the stage. And when I start to leave, they're following me out to the parking lot. I mean, I've had them surrounding my car, literally throwing questions at me. And you know what? There's something wrong there because where are the teachers? Where are the pediatricians? Why is it the first time they've ever heard anything like this is when they're in college?
Well, Gail, I brought this up to almost all of my friends. I'm 44 now. Almost all of my friends had their children in their 20s. And then I had a second wave of friends in their 30s having children. And every time I go to talk to them, I have two responses. One, in my own self, I'm like, oh, if they have boys, I need to talk to them about pornography. And then I did a critical breakdown and I was like, no, you need to talk to everyone who has children because boys or girls, they're all falling prey to this like harmful culture. But what was so shocking to me was when I brought it up to every single friend, they were like, oh, it's like they didn't even hear what I was saying. Like they couldn't imagine that their child would ever have access to pornography. And I was saying to them, the only guarantee is that your child will have access. If you don't talk to them about it, who will?
Well, you know who will? The porn industry.
Yeah, and the weird thing, I went to a digital safety conference, like at a digital conference online a couple of years ago, and I remember they said that like somebody asked them, they were like, "Well, how soon should we give our child a phone?" And like they directly said, "When you're ready for them to have access to pornography, because that's when they'll see it. That's when they'll see it." And the crazy thing is like, I talked to a lot of women my age and younger, and it seems like the things that you were outlining that's in pornography, like, anal sex and strangling, all of these things that we saw that was just very, very prominent in porn. Like a lot of these women are now saying that it's become really normal in their dating lives, that they've gone on dates with men and that men are asking to strangle them or to do, unnatural sex acts they wouldn't usually be comfortable with, but they feel like they have to go ahead with it because they're like, it's so normalized. And like, whenever I've spoken to people about how that's like one of my biggest things is like, I will not date a man who watches pornography. They're like, well, then you're going to have no one to date because it's impossible. You won't find somebody like that. And so like, we have to compromise. So like, how would you push back against those people who feel like they have to compromise because otherwise they have no options?
Okay, well, first of all, let's just talk about the strangulation. There's a recent study showed they interviewed first year women college students and they asked them about not their overall history of their sex life, just the last time they had sex. And 1 in 3 reported being strangled.
Oh, my sweet Lord. What the hell?
Wait, how long ago was this study?
Recent, recent. 1 in 3. And that was just their last act. It wasn't, over their sexual lifetime. It was one act last time. So first of all, we're talking about 1 in 3. Secondly, the question about, what was your second question? I'm sorry, about.
How would you push back against women who say that if I have the standard of porn, like I won't have anyone to date?
Let me put it this way. Let's think about other groups that are oppressed. And I'm going to say, for example, I'm going to speak about myself. I'm Jewish, okay? Would I ever date a man who enjoyed reading anti-Semitic literature, right? If you're an African American, would you date a white guy who enjoyed racist media? So why do women date guys who like misogynist media and actually masturbate to it? And I understand that if if you take out all the men who've used pornography, your dating pool is down to probably 5. I don't know, very low. I mean, the problem here, because my students would come up all the time in my feminist theories class, is like, look, you cannot expect to meet a man who has not used pornography when you're dating. You cannot. But what you have to do is educate him, show him where to go and read, right? You don't have to do the education. As many men have written about this, Bob Jensen, Jackson Katz. And then he has to stop. And if he doesn't stop at that moment, that's when you walk away. Because really, if you're looking for a guy that's not used porn, I don't know where you're going to find them, right? I really don't. But if they have used it and come to see the light, that what it's done to them and how it's changed them. And when I say see the light, I'm not talking in a religious way, of course, I'm talking in a progressive feminist way. If they continue to use it, then you have to walk away. Women have to be more willing to walk away from men. They have to be. You try as much as you can. You don't kill yourself doing it because it's not our job to educate men, but unfortunately, it's fallen on us. And if he won't listen, then you walk. You walk because you cannot do that to yourself. You cannot internalize that and be with a man who has developed such a level of misogyny through pornography. Remember, they're not born misogynists, but it doesn't take much pornography to turn them into misogynists. It doesn't take many Andrew Tates to turn them into misogynists. So you then have to walk away. But, in my class, it was so heartbreaking because, when I had a lot of gay men in my class as well, and pornography is totally stitched into gay male culture as well. And the heterosexual women and the gay men in my classes had the same problem. They couldn't find a man today who would stop using pornography. There was no guys out there. And so it was so painful to see, but also it was great to see because I swear my students grew like 6 inches during the class. Their bodies, the way they stood, the way they actually thought about themselves, and it was such a privilege to be part of teaching young women a radical type of feminism. And it's not really radical, right? It's basic to say, to talk about sexual violence and pornography and all of that. But in this culture, it's radical to do that. They would come into class day one and I'd say, how many of you are feminists? And maybe 2 hands would go up. And we'd talk about porn and they'd all come out with this liberation agency bullshit, stuff. And by week 4, I swear they were ready to tear down the porn industry with their bare hands, if need be. And it doesn't take much to bring consciousness to women. It does not, because their lifetime experience is getting them ready for consciousness. Because suddenly what happens when you discover feminism is everything goes bang, 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 bang. Suddenly your life makes sense. I remember me discovering it at 16 in a cafe in London reading Right-Wing Women by Andrew Dworkin. And the introduction to it for the English. And it was like in that introduction, my entire life made sense in a way it never had before. And that's what it is like to wake up. It's like you've been looking in the world in black and white and suddenly it's in colour. You'd never realised what it looked like. I mean, there's that great, I don't know if you've ever seen Thelma and Louise, but, it's wonderful, wonderful movie. And it's really about Thelma's movement into feminism. And at one point, they've been driving for days, no one slept. And Thelma says, I'm so awake. I've never been this awake in my life. Everything looks different. And of course it looks different because she's come to feminist consciousness and the world looks different. And then at one point, Louise says to her, Susan Sarandon says to her, about, you're not going to go back, are you, and leave me here like this? And Thelma says, I can't go back. I would die if I went back. And I think many of us feel that if we left our feminist consciousness, what would be left of us? Who would we be? It would need a lobotomy to take my feminism away, because it's given me a life. It's made who I am. It's made me a life of purpose.
I feel so identified to this because one thing that Diana and I have an ongoing conversation about is like, Diana comes from a very loving household where her father very much prized her independence and her agency and her ability. And I come from a hyper conservative Christian, I called him neo Rumsfeldian back in the day. Just like I was, having to listen to countless hours of Rush Limbaugh in the car. Right. And of course, like, as somebody who went on to pursue her PhD, I was always asking questions like, this doesn't make sense. This doesn't add up. And I was met so often with violence, right? Because I was daring to question his authority as a man. And so it really took me a very long time to come to feminism because I had been trained to, avoid anything like that, or, to be called a tree hugger or a commie Marxist, or like, there was no end of insults. But when I finally really did embrace feminism, that's when I felt finally free to be who I am and to be liberated as a human being. And I think that's so often what women are missing.
But you know what, with that, and there's nothing like it. I mean, there's absolutely nothing like embracing it and realizing who you are. But it's a tough thing to come to because what you're going to have to do is withstand all the insults, the pressure, the way that people think about you as a feminist. But believe me, it is worth it. It is so worth every drop of whatever gets thrown at you because you have a life, you have a sense of self, you see the world differently. Feminism is not just looking at pornography and understanding it's bad or violence against women. It's a whole worldview, and it also carries a worldview of how we're meant to be as human beings as well. And the notion of kindness and compassion and love and connection to the earth and connection to each other. I mean, it is just an entire worldview that once you step into, I don't think there's any going back. I don't think there's ever any going. I don't see how you can go back.
I totally agree. I definitely think that there's a lot of benefit in standing your ground and living a life on your terms because, despite the fact that I did come from a very supportive family structure, I mean, we all come from cultures that are constantly telling you to compromise with men and constantly telling you that this is an unrealistic expectation to have of them. And like, don't you want to be married? And like, you can't have such a hard and rigid line. And I've personally never understood why you shouldn't have standards for your own life. I mean, if I choose not to have a partner that watches a lot of pornography, I don't know who that's hurting except me and him. You know what I mean? Like, but people have these fixed ideas about what they think other people should live their lives like. And, and a lot of people have compromised. And I think a lot of them want to make sense of their own compromise, right? If they've compromised to have a partner that portrays a family image by day and then goes back and watches pornography by night, they have to, it has to make sense to them in some way. They have to make their peace with that in some way.
I don't think they make sense of it. I think they make excuses.
Yeah, yeah.
I think to make sense of it would actually result in you couldn't stay.
I mean that in like a twisted way of like they have to justify their choices, right? And so the way they justify their choices are by attacking yours. Because if everybody around them is adhering to the similar structure, because the thing is, once you prove to them that they didn't need to make that choice, their entire reality crumbles, right? Because I choose to not compromise on that front, their entire reality will crumble. If you belong to a culture that's that misogynistic, like I come from a South Asian culture where almost everyone gets married by their late 20s and 30s. It's like unheard of to be a single woman into your 40s, and it's not the norm. I mean, there are definitely single women, but it's not the norm, and they certainly aren't like held up by the community as pillars of like aspiration. Nobody is aspiring to be a single woman. And so a lot of the pushback you get is, well, what are your reasons? Like justify your standards. And so if you have a standard such as like, well, I don't want to watch someone who watches and consumes misogynistic media, they're like, well, that's very unrealistic, especially pornography. I mean, I'm not even saying misogynistic media in general because we'll be here we'll have to tackle the entire TV and film industry. But specifically with pornography, they're like, well, we don't get it because that's just who men are. Boys will be boys. Men will be men, you know? And it seems like we're coming back into that system and we're regressing back into that system because we actually had this discussion a couple of weeks ago about Honora as well. And I think I was telling you about how the director and his wife, who was the producer of the film, like enacted sex acts for the actress to copy when she was filming, which I thought was really strange because when people asked her, do you need an intimacy coordinator? She was like, No, I mean, I think that should be left up to each actor as opposed to it being something that's to ensure the actor's comfort, because this is also for young women who enter the industry who might not be comfortable advocating for themselves. But in some ways, I wonder, do you think that intimacy coordinators and people like that are helpful, or do you think it's a band aid to the situation in some way because it still doesn't address like the root depiction of the pornified way in which we consume media?
I think that's absolutely true, but I also think they're necessary because you have many young women on the set. And when, one of the things that the Me Too movement did and Time's Up was to show just how many young women had been raped on the set, sexually harassed. So I do think intimacy coordinators for those women are excellent. Do I think it will in any way shift the misogynist media? No, I don't think it will. But it will make life better for that, individual actress, which she needs that protection. The whole notion. I remember when I won all the Oscars and everything, and one of the speeches that the writers and directors gave is, "We stand with you, sex workers." Well, first of all, I'll never use the term sex work because it legitimizes the pimps and the johns and delegitimizes the experiences of the women in the sex industry. But I remember Rachel Moran wrote a wonderful piece. I can't remember where it was, and she said, "Okay, you want to stand with us, then take an 8-hour shift and get fucked by as many men as we do. And then you tell me that's what standing with us looks like." And of course, it just brought it all into clarity that they stand with you. What is Hollywood stars going to do when they stand with women whose job it is to be fucked by as many men and, called all the names? So it made me crazy watching that whole period with that film and that it won an Oscar. How hideous is that?
Did you hear that Cheryl Lee Ralph was asked about the Oscars and like who would win this year? And she said, well, just look at the stats. Like more women portraying prostitutes in film have won Oscars than any Black women ever.
That's true.
I mean, I believe she literally said, if you want to win an Oscar, get on the pole.
Yeah, well, two things. If you want to win an Oscar, either play a prostituted woman or a Holocaust victim.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, there are more women who have played sex workers who are not, well, prostitutes who have won the Oscar than there are Black women who won the Oscar or any other minority.
The last count I had was 16 out of 25. So 25 were nominated for an Academy Award who played prostituted women and 16 won, which is an incredible amount.
Yeah, yeah. And the funny thing is, I mean, the film doesn't really depict the character in a positive light anyway. I mean, she kind of gets essentially used by everyone around her. So, I mean, at the end of the day, they're kind of validating the points we're making about the industry in general. That character has very little agency and is used by a lot more, powerful people around her in the film. She doesn't really have any power in the structure at all. And she's kind of depicted to be like, a woman with stars in her eyes who's like, I'm in love with this person, this oligarch's son, and he just takes her for a ride. So it seems like it's actually surprisingly a weirdly realistic depiction of what it would be like if you were a prostitute that met a very wealthy Russian oligarch's kid. But they're making it seem like this is like supposed to be empowering for women who are in that profession and line of work. I mean, or people who are pimping women out.
Yeah, it's a completely, it's a pimp and John's view of what prostitution is. It's not, if you really want to show prostitution, I mean, I couldn't imagine that film winning an Oscar.
I was going to say, we always hear about the prostitutes and it's always through this sort of filmy lens, but we never ever, and again, this is part of their like sacred cow. We never actually see, the seediness and the depravity of these men who are the Johns and the pimps, right?
And if you notice, the films that do well are always like the she's a hooker with a heart of gold, like Pretty Woman depiction of prostitution. It's always like, oh, but she has a great heart. And it never actually focuses on the ugly side of what she has to do for a living. And it always gives you like this Richard Gere kind of like attractive guy that, she latches onto, as opposed to the reality of the men that they have to deal with.
It's interesting, man. Like, think about Hollywood. And that made Julia Roberts' career and also made a fortune. And the first thing that Hollywood does when a film makes a fortune is it makes a second version and a third version and a fourth. And why was there no Pretty Woman Part 2? Because the answer would be, well, you know what her film was after that? Julia Roberts' film after that? Sleeping with the Enemy. That would have been Pretty Woman Part 2 because that's exactly what she'd be doing. She'd be sleeping with the enemy. I mean, can you imagine they're on the honeymoon, the prostituted woman and the John, And so they have an argument over, I don't know, whether they have steak for dinner or whatever, lobster or whatever. And what's he going to turn around and say to her? You dirty whore. I picked you up off the streets. You disagree with me. You're going back to the streets. Could you imagine what her life would look like married to the John?
Yeah, and the crazy part is I recall reading that that was not the version they were going to go with. When they made Pretty Women originally, it was supposed to be a darker look at prostitution, but they ended up changing it and making this like candy floss version where it's essentially a rom-com. But that was not the original version of it. It was supposed to be like a darker look at it. And so, I mean, I don't know what was, who came on board. Maybe the producer changed and whatever, but like, I mean, I think they normalized it and they made it seem like it's actually fun in some ways to be a prostitute. Like, there's a possibility. You go shopping,
Yeah, you go shopping,
you meet this attractive man.
expensive clothes, jewellery, you go to the opera, the normal everyday life of a prostituted woman.
The other part that they never show, and of course we know it's because of this, like having it be the third rail, as Gail called it. The other part is, they never really show what women have gone through in order to have to become a prostitute. They come from a family where their father or their uncle is raping them. They come from oftentimes, most times, extreme poverty. Many of them are immigrants who have, been fed the false golden promise of freedom in the Western world. I discussed this with you earlier, Gail, the movie Eastern Promises, which is something about this very premise. And it's like they never want us to see the reality of how these women come to be prostitutes because it's a tragedy each and every time.
And also how these women end up, because, you end up, even if you're a high-end, so-called high-end call girl. I remember speaking to one of the police here who dealt with trafficking and prostitution, and she said, and she was very much, in the camp of basically decriminalising the women and criminalising the Johns, a very thoughtful woman. And she said, you see these so-called high-end prostitutes in their expensive outfits. She says often that's all they ever own. They've got nothing else, that one outfit, and they're destitute. I mean, you don't see where they end up on the street, and it's a very slippery rail that you go down as you get older because your body is so abused, and you're so open to risks of STIs and stuff, and difficult to get healthcare. So you don't actually see how these women, go down that slippery slope and end up on the streets turning tricks for $20 a day, a turn. I go to when I lecture in the universities and I get these academic women who drive me nuts and start saying, how sex work is. And I said, and then in the end, the answer I've got to them, I say, look, how much money did you take out to get a bachelor's degree, a master's, and a PhD? I mean, you must have a ton of student loans. And so you've got all these loans. Tell me, why did you bother? If being prostituted is so great, why didn't you start working at 14 on the streets? You could have got $20 a shot. You wouldn't have all these loans. So why did you choose academia? And the reality is they chose it because they had choices. That's exactly it. And you know what? Prostitution is okay, or pornography for her over there. It's just not something I would choose.
Hi, everyone. We are so excited to have Dr. Gail Dines on the podcast today, and we know you want to hear more from her. But if you do, you're going to have to subscribe to our Patreon and listen to her on our bonus content, where you'll be able to get the entire interview that we had with her today. And now, back to our regularly scheduled programming. Thanks for listening.